Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Scott Stevenson back on the show, and we had a fantastic chat. Those that don't know Scott, he is a fantastic mind within the bodybuilding space, and specifically has authored amazing books such as Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. He is the master behind the Fortitude training program, which you might have heard of, and many people have got huge results that way. He obviously does tons of work with bodybuilders from every single level within the space, and he's a brilliant thinker. And on the lines of thinking, off air we were having a fascinating discussion basically surrounding AI, and Scott was like, hey, we should talk about this on the show. And so we actually ended up going quite deep into that and not actually touching on the topics that we had planned, so we're going to have to do another episode. And we talked about kind of the risks and dangers of AI, whether or not that be for coaches and coaching or just for you day to day, and how many of us are very aware of kind of clean and dirty eating. Obviously those kind of concepts are somewhat flawed to some extent, like what is clean, what is dirty, but you kind of get the understanding. And Scott has talked about this in terms of what our kind of diet is, in terms of what we're consuming for our brain. So you want to go for kind of clean thinking, he kind of coined, and just the ramifications of AI and how it could lead us down a path that we don't want to go down. So a really fascinating discussion as always with Scott. So you guys, if you do enjoy this one, definitely make sure to tag myself, tag Scott, let us know that you're listening, share it over on your Instagram story or whatever social media platform that you're on. As always, give us a comment, give us a like, give us a 5-star review. It's all really, really appreciated. And we talked quite a lot about coaching in this episode. So as a reminder, at Revive Stronger, we are online coaches. That is what we do to get our bread and butter. That is what we do to get our bread and butter. That is our bread and butter in terms of our job. But that's what we do to put kind of food on the table, as it were. And as I discussed within this episode, we pride ourselves on keeping coaching very personal and keeping that communication channel very dynamic and letting you have input, but also educating you along the way. It is not our way or the highway. It is very much a relationship that we try and develop with our clients. If that's something that you feel eager that you'd like, then definitely make sure to check out our coaching. It's always linked in the description. But otherwise, let's get into this fascinating chat with Dr. Scott. So Scott, we were just talking off air and having a bit of a chit chat and a catch up. Yes. And basically came on to, as always, discussions with you, Scott. They're very interesting and at a high level. And I thought, well, actually, you mentioned, why not talk about this on the air? Because AI is hot off the press, is in vogue. It's going to be for the rest of our years. We're kind of talking about life extension with AI. And then you also were just mentioning kind of the, I guess, the scary elements of AI in terms of whether or not it could escape. And it's not an area I'm well read in, I have to admit. But I have been using some elements of AI within my business, but that's about the extent it goes to. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
The thing I was about to say, you were saying in 20 years, AI is going to have figured out how we can just live forever, right? And that computing power is something that, because it's growing so exponentially, that is, it's perhaps reasonable. I don't know. I'm not in no way, shape, or means an expert in the area, but what I've heard about, and if people want to look into this, it's really pretty friggin' crazy. The idea of a quantum computer that basically does calculations hundreds of thousands, millions times faster than modern conventional computers. There's some issues with making that happen, but you basically, like, one of the ideas that comes to that, if you have like two electrons, they have two different spins, they're connected quantumly in some way, and you can separate them. And when you flip the valence of one, so from down to up or vice versa, the other one flips simultaneously without any delay. Like, they're connected through the fabric of the universe in some way, and there's no delay. It's like you shine a light, we don't notice the delay. Like someone shines a flashlight on you, we don't see the speed of light, but in terms of like what happens, like you theoretically, you could take those two electrons that are paired in an atom and separate them by the majority of the distance of the universe, and you flip one, the other one would flip simultaneously. It was because they're connected in that way. So you could take, I don't know anything more. That's just like one kind of like, mind-boggling idea. But if you take AI and put it in a quantum computer that can calculate that fast, and there's this classical, you hear this is the example people talk all the time is, let's say you say, AI, I want I want AI to make staples, just be a staple maker, right? We want to have staples because we need more staples, and just start making staples. And you do a really sloppy job of telling the AI, just start making these staples, and you don't even think about like what that could mean. And this is just the example. This wouldn't happen explicitly in this scenario, but this is the idea, sort of a thought experiment. You throw sloppy instructions at an AI in a quantum computer, and eventually it figures out, it's like, well, if I'm going to carry out this command, I have to get outside of this computer onto the internet, and I need to take the whole world over. And next thing you know, in 10 years, the world is just, from outer space, it's just covered with staples, right?
Yeah.
So we have staples, something like that, right? So that's kind of like the extreme end of what the fears of what AI would be. But yeah, it's what's the term is a cultural cognitive convention. Like GPS is an example of this. So
Right.
people start using GPS, and they can't go anywhere. They don't know can't drive in their own town.
Sure.
Because they don't know the streets, because they just put it in and they don't pay attention. And so they lose, not only do they not learn their own town, but they lose the ability to navigate. So, when you use AI to do rudimentary tasks, then not that you're going to lose the ability to, write simple letters or do simple things, but whatever you might have gained and learned, like example I heard someone say is, they're doing like some contracts, writing up contracts for doing handyman work around a house. And they just had AI said, ChatGPT, write me a contract with blah, 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 and do this, right? And ChatGPT will do it. And then they check it over, right? But let's say someone needed in various circumstances to be able to, write those contracts with some amount of nuance, right? And the word, and maybe they, like in explaining that to someone, using nuance is the term that they would use. Over time, they don't use words like nuance. They would lose their vocabulary, and then you become someone like many people who understand foreign languages but can't speak them very well becomes. So you okay, that looks good, I can understand, but could you write that letter in that nuanced way after 10 years of not having written a letter? It's kind of like, you had to learn handwriting in school, I take it. You had to write.
Yeah.
And so did I. And my handwriting is terrible. I've tried to write things, it's like, and I wrote for years and years and years, right? But my handwriting, it looks like a child's who never had to. It's terrible. And this happens to, foreign language speakers. I've met at German. I may have mentioned the German thing. I'm doing lots of German podcasts in German, and there are some that haven't spoken German in so long, and they unlearn their native tongue after a while. So anyway, AI is, people are just I think are using it, and there'll be situations where there could be a skill or a task that they could have learned, and I think that's one of the most important. We'll segue this into bodybuilding is having challenges that you overcome, right? And learning how to do things and feeling like, what, I've mastered something. Like Nietzsche might have talked about that. Like, it's not just about mediocrity. This is kind of the connect with the Übermensch. It's about having a task and then mastering it. So let's say you're writing those little letters, those little contracts for handyman work, and you become a master of that, become really good at it. That makes your life better. Because you're like, I'll write another one. It takes you 8 minutes as opposed to 8 seconds. But you do it, and it's like, and it was worth it. And it made my life better because that was something that I'm now feel really good at. And I sort of enjoy it because I like getting in the flow of writing those and writing them a little bit differently, but still it's legally correct, right? And you miss out on those things when you just hand off the task, the intellectual tasks to AI. And we don't go gob of good. Sorry, I'm just rambling here, but like selecting what is just the most boring thing ever, right? Do this thing. It's like there's not much redeeming value in doing some very rudimentary, basic thing that AI can do for you. But then there's kind of that gray zone, and that the gray zone shifts and it becomes a slippery slope. And next thing you know, people have told AI to write books. This has already happened years ago that you can buy on Amazon. He said, write a book about this. These are the key players, and write it in the style of of Carl Jung and Dostoevsky and Nietzsche all kind of blended together and make it kind of dark and blah blah blah, and have a central hero. And like, okay, that was a little too long, but I want you to add, a little bit of this, and they will just do it in a matter of just hours. They've got the whole book, we don't even know what you do with that intellectual property. Is that yours? Did you actually write that?
Yeah.
Because the AI pulled from all those authors and the collective information of the internet. So anyway, I think the AI is kind of it's going to be one of those things where, kind of related to what Einstein once said, is that our technology may outstrip our morality, and our technology may outstrip our own intelligence in a way that we don't know what's good for us. It's good to do those things, right? It's good to like park further from the grocery store, so you have to do some extra walking. Like, this is trying to bring it back to bodybuilding, as opposed to, eventually you're someone who's getting older and losing that ability. And eventually you're riding the cart, and you're like, man, I wish, happens this all the time, I wish I would have just gotten the habit of going to check my mail twice a day, just in case, or using those things so that I don't lose them. And hindsight's 2020. So I just have the sense that hindsight might be 2020 when it comes to AI at some point down the road. Yeah.
It's fascinating, Scott, and the points you bring up. You actually just mentioned it at the end there. The saying that was coming to mind was "use it or lose it."
Mm-hmm.
I think about that, like handwriting. Like I so very rarely handwrite. I think I'd get cramp if I had to write much more than like a few sentences on to send a note or send a letter or whatever.
It's like, my hand's so tight. It's been 10 seconds and my hand is so fatigued. It's funny.
So that worries me. And as an example, I guess it's like calculators. Like my math is probably was better years and years ago, whereas now I rely on a calculator. I won't bother trying to do it. But there is something to, especially as you age, like challenging your brain and keeping it going and kind of doing these like brain games and things like this that keep it fresh and working at its best. Whereas if you just, again, outsource it all, you kind of lose that skill set. I think it's good if you can use, I guess, like a calculator to then, okay, I can kind of use that to not worry about those elements for my brain, but I can use my brain for higher level tasks or other tasks.
Right.
It's a problem if you don't do that and you just rely on technology or this AI and what have you, and it just takes over and you slowly become dumber and dumber and less of your, I guess, a superior being that humans are meant to be.
Yeah, meant to be. That's the question. Yeah, you start outsourcing those. There's a guy. He's actually got a number of talks in English. He's a German. He's a physician and a neurologist from Germany, Manfred Spitzer. I'll say it so you can find him. And he has a book called Digital Dementia, and there's lots of aspects to that. But one of the things that he substantiated in his book, and he's done a number of talks on this, is that, for instance, with kids who are using computers in schools, the research doesn't really suggest that helps with learning outcomes. You don't get better test scores when you start. What happens, except for the kids who are the most gifted and curious, then they have a way to explore and take in more information. But for most young people, for most kids, it ends up being a distraction. And you take away, like, for instance, take the calculator idea. You don't learn those tasks. And that's important because your brain is growing and developing when you're young, and you've got this tremendous neuroplasticity that allows the neurons to connect together to one another. And he talks about like this famous example of a young girl who had an infection in her brain when she was 2 or 3, and they took out like 70 or 80% of her brain matter. And then they did follow up on her, and that included her language centers. Her Broca's and Wernicke's centers were gone. She had no language centers technically. It's places where all your language gets composed and understood, etc. And they came back, and when she was like 9 or 11, and they're thinking, okay, she's going to maybe barely be able to communicate. She spoke not just one, but she spoke 3 languages fluently because she grew up in a home with her 3 languages. So her brain, with 20% of the available matter, recreated the language centers. So you have this tremendous plasticity. And why that's important, and this is what the digital dementia is, all this digitalization means we don't have to process stuff as much. And what happens, and there's another example he gives of a woman who was a teacher who took dementia tests throughout her last years of life. She lived to be like she was 90, and she was always teaching and learning new things and teaching things, and she kept herself intellectually active. And she welcomed this. When she died, they autopsied her brain, and she had all the physical symptoms of Alzheimer's, neurofibrillary tangles and
Wow.
beta amyloid plaque. Her brain was riddled with it. You think that she was just vegetative. She had absolutely no symptoms of dementia. But what she did have is all these interconnections that she'd spent a lifetime building up and maintaining. So her brain actually was able to work around the cognitive deficits that would have been in place. But if you're someone who grows up without developing that plasticity, you build it up as it's kind of like bone mineral density. Your bone mineral density peaks when there's like 30 or so, and then tends to go down. The idea is that you want to get as high as you can so that you have a reserve, right? And it happens with the heart too. Like people that are highly trained and maybe they have a heart attack, but they have collateralization of their coronary arteries. So they do have a secondary way of redundancy, so to speak, in the coronary artery system to get oxygen to that tissue that otherwise would have died off. So just like we're seeing with activity levels, especially in the US, where you can just take the escalator, you can just park right if you don't ride your bike, you take your car, and the same thing is going to happen with our brains. And this is Spitzer's idea of digital dementias. Without building that reserve early in life, we're going to have an epidemic of dementia that's going to be early onset relative to how we see it now, because of all these people who haven't used their brains in the way that they could. So I hate to say it, but I think his prognosis is probably going to be true to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, that's a scary thought. I think a lot of the listeners will be aware of kind of, the benefits of the weight training and resistance training they're doing and living that healthy lifestyle now, and that's going to see them well into their later years. And hopefully we have an intellectually kind of curious audience who like listening to people like yourself, Scott. So they're probably doing many good things for their brain. But do you have anything? I know right now you said you've learned German, you speak it actually really well.
Yeah.
I don't know if any part of that was kind of trying to keep everything up there kind of lit and fired and kind of going, but is there any kind of tips or advice you have for listeners who are like, hey, I want to be functioning kind of up there as well as physically, mentally, I want to be switched on in my later years?
There is a study suggesting that older people who speak a second language fluently, who learn that in their adulthood, it puts off dementia by 5 years. So
wow,
that's a good thing, right? And I didn't do it. I'm not doing it. It's not like I'm trying to avoid a heart attack, so I'm doing aerobic training. I'm trying to avoid dementia, although it runs in my family. My mom's in her 80s now, and she's okay, but both of her parents, my grandparents, had dementia when they hit their 90s. So, yeah, I tell you one thing I think is important. So there's a guy named, I think his first name is Andrew Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize. And I don't know this research all that well. I just picked it up sort of secondhand from various things I've listened to. And he talks about, we have sort of system 1 thinking abilities and system 2. And system 1 is sort of your gut instinct, the thing that happens right off the bat when you're faced with a problem. And system 2 is more of your critical thinking, when your prefrontal cortex has to become engaged and you have to rethink what you're doing. So, one question that will sort of highlight this. There's a series of 3 questions. They're kind of famous, so some people have probably heard these before. But the question is, you have a tennis racket and a tennis ball, and the cost of those 2 things, if you were to purchase them, is $100. You know this one, $1.10. Yeah.
I just did one very similar to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it the one with the lily pads?
It was a cost of something, but it might have even been the tennis racket and tennis ball. I think it was.
Yeah. So a lot of people know. So it's like, and the tennis racket costs $1 more than the tennis ball. What does the tennis ball cost? And people are like, oh, well, $1.10, like $1. They just see the numbers and they jump to the quick mathematical conclusion without double checking their work. So the system 1 kicks in and says, oh, it's 10 cents and $1, but $1 is not a dollar more than 10 cents, 90 cents more, right? So it's $1.05 is a dollar more than 5 cents. But that takes, you have to step back. And so in doing that, you're engaging that higher order thinking. And I think getting in the habit of being self-reflective, sort of looking at yourself from the third person and watching, like, for instance, how you behave online. Are you constantly clicking on YouTube shorts and Instagram and trains that? This is the thing that concerns, I'm no expert here, but it just concerns me, is that you see young people and their average phone use is 8 hours a day in like junior high students, and I think in the US. And your brain will get entrained into that sort of mode, system one thinking and quick, just impulsive thinking, without having to step back and actually do calculations and considerations and connect the dots from various areas. And you can go like on the YouTube shorts, and all those things are cultivated to grab your attention. So you see somebody like, or he's doing a backflip off of a bridge, and the next one is, it's like a chicken that's going to get eaten by a wolf, and there's all these things, and they're like, you want to watch each of them because like, oh, what the hell's going to happen here? They all are so clickable, but you're just bouncing around from stuff, right? It's a jumbled mass of information. So that interconnection, where like, this is why I do like German, for instance, and learning the language, is that there's so many bits and pieces to the grammar and how you conjugate, declinate, and fit things together. And there's all these, and so all the German words are coming to my head now, but there's all these aspects of the language where there's so much room for improvement. I will never, I'm doing this all from home here. I'm not even in Germany, but even then, like, to get where you would be native speaker level, like Pascal is, his English is just like mind-boggling. You can't really tell that didn't grow up in the UK, right? People can get there. Some people have a gift for it. But having some part of your life oriented towards ensuring that you're doing some deeper level thinking, where you have to connect the dots and being, I've referred to it as, I have a video from years ago, and this related to bodybuilding. I called it clean thinking. I mentioned this on other podcasts. So we got clean eating, right? It's like, so you probably had a podcast about, what does clean eating mean? Is it chicken and rice all the time, or do you do carnivore because that's your inclination, or do you have lots of fruits and vegetables in there? You avoid processed foods. There's all sorts of things that could be clean eating. So everyone has, their own opinion, own thoughts. It hasn't been really clearly defined what that means, but I think in the same vein, clean thinking as to what am I putting in my brain can be applied. What thoughts am I allowing to go through? So am I going to sit and, zone out? Like, you go to the doctor's office, right? You got a half an hour to wait. You get and just futz around, and it'd be like, you go to the doctor's office. Would you go down the hallway to the vending machine and just eat like those nasty orange crackers, with the peanut butter in them? And would you nourish yourself? No one listening would do that, right? But you do an analogous thing when you sit and just consume junk, whereas you could put an audiobook on your phone, right, and just listen to that. And I try to, I enjoy that action. That's the trick, is to make it enjoyable, not like, oh my God, I got to study something here that I don't want to do. It's find something listen to the Revive Stronger podcast, and when you hear, Scott Stevenson or whoever note a study, it's like, I'm going to go look that study up and go try to find it and then read it and download it. And as long as it's interesting and you want to do it, that's the trick. Then you can get that kind of dopamine hit and nourish your brain with something that actually feeds your brain the nourishment that it needs to be healthy, as opposed to putting in empty calories, so to speak, with just junk. So the first thing is just to figure out, like, define what is clean thinking for you. And most people know. Like, imagine the experiment you'd make. It's like, imagine if I took my brain and I did nothing. Every time I consumed stuff on my phone, it was just Instagram and TikTok videos for the next 5 years. And I do that 2 hours a day, versus I get a subscription to audiobooks.com or Audible, and I spend 2 hours a day listening to audiobooks that are interesting. And they could be on cooking or anything, but how would my brain function after those 2 5-year periods? TikTok, I mean, you'd be a jumble. What do you even remember from that? Like, it would just, I can't even imagine what it would be like. It'd be like, what would your body be like if you just ate from a vending machine? The vending machine study, right? They could do this. Like, you get, potato chips and Doritos, all the junk. I don't know if they have those in the UK so much, but like you see them everywhere. Whatever you buy at a gas station.
We have vending machines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So sometimes they've not that it's ideal. Sometimes they're protein bars in, but basically it's all
Right.
just highly ultra processed foods that aren't going to be particularly nutritious.
Right. So yeah. So everyone can figure out what that means. Like, every once in a while, yeah, you go watch some, pick out your. It's like trashy romantic romance novels. Sometimes you're like, I'm gonna just, it's my guilty indulgence for some people. Some women might like those, right? And so you don't have to be a Spartan about it. Some person living in the jungle and you're not eating anything, right? But that's the idea that I think that just makes sense, and that's what we don't do so well as humans is we create this technology and then we're not so aware of, like, in the terms of transportation, in terms of the internet, in terms of GPSs, and it's not a bad idea to every once in a while, like I've had the habit of, like, I'm going someplace, I know the roads I'm going to be on, I just drove there and I still set my GPS for the way home. It's like, no, you don't need the GPS. It's a habit, right? Don't do the GPS, and then you pay attention to more things, and maybe you learn where the side streets are. And so just being aware is so being mindful, I think, is so important.
I absolutely love the idea of kind of the clean
thinking,
like what you're taking in, clean thinking. Yeah, it just when you say it like that, I relate to it so hard. And to relate it to bodybuilding, just because immediately as you were talking about this, something I noticed, Scott, was so I go for a morning dog walk for 45 minutes with my dog. And as I was getting deeper and deeper into prep, that walk was getting obviously tougher and tougher.
Right.
And I was finding myself, I like almost felt like I had to soothe my brain with, it was reels on Instagram. So same as YouTube shorts. And I felt like I was just looking at my phone the whole walk. And I felt like I had to like pass the time and like soothe myself through that journey. I just felt like my brain was just like, it was so starved that it was needing junk.
Yeah. That's very, very astute of you to be aware of that, picked up on that. And I mean, I said this isn't, we had some other things to talk about today, but that's the thought that I've had so much with what's happening today with coaching. For instance, coaches have purpose. The way I look at it, the big picture is that on the one end with bodybuilding, you could have some people who you might ask and say, hey, if I could just wave a magic wand, I had a genie in the bottle, and I could just, look like I was stage ready and have the body of my dreams without any work and having done nothing for it, just boom, it just magically appear. Some people would take that on. They don't want to train. They really don't want to train. They really don't want to diet. They just want to look that way. It's a completely sort of superficial, maybe narcissistic, egotistical perspective on things. And I'm not saying there's tons and tons of people there. I don't know what the distribution is, but that would be on one end. And then there would be people that are probably more like me. I'm definitely on this end of the spectrum. Is that not the autism spectrum, but the spectrum? Sometimes and under. Is the harder the work, the more value in it, and the more difficulties I have, the more things I can learn, and the more I can potentially improve myself. So like that last week or those last few weeks where so many people say, and I see this just said, is, and I've mentioned this numerous times, but it bears repeating, I think, is that people are like, well, that's when you just need to hire a coach. And I think of this as, I'm going to run a marathon, and you could run a marathon with roller skates on, and then you did a marathon, right? But it was a lot easier. People like, well, you didn't really run a marathon. We did the 26 miles, right? It's like, no. Well, you wouldn't do that, right? But would you run a marathon, and then when you get to the last mile, say, wow, this is the tough one, man, and just call someone in and say, hey, and just sit down in a wheelchair and let them push you the last mile? Would you want to do that? And not that it's that bad with a coach, right? But you're making it easier. And that's the most important, that's the most redeeming part of the struggle, in my opinion. Now, you don't want to fall flat on your face and not be able to take care of your clients, and just completely bomb out. Although, in reality, what does it really hurt? I mean, unless your family's going to starve because you shit the bed and you didn't do well, you didn't win the Olympia and you placed outside the top 5 and you lost your sponsor, like that's, very few and far between. Those guys need to do everything because they're making money this way. But for most of us, the way I see it, at this end of that spectrum, is that the purpose, the reason for the redeeming value because of the bodybuilding experience is because it's something that's hard to do, and you learn who you are, and you reap value from those difficult times. So it's like that's what I'm kind of looking. It's sort of like another microcosm of that is a set when you're training in the gym. You get to the end, and it's like I'm doing bodybuilding training because it's hard. And if you ever had, you probably had this situation, you're in a set, you're going for it. Maybe you're getting close to a PR, you're training your butt off, and you have someone, maybe you pulled in it hasn't happened to me for years, but it's happened enough times I remember it. And to have had that victory. And that's a short-term thing, so it's kind of easier to see it that way. But that's sort of how I see bodybuilding in a sense, if you're of that inclination. So some people are somewhere in the middle. Right? And they have to be reasonable. They have lives they need to live. They maybe do tons of cognitive things, intellectual things, and maybe they're coaches too, and they just want to hand it over to someone else because that gives them the right amount of struggle while they're doing bodybuilding, and they don't want to have to think through those things. So you can be everywhere in between, but what I'm seeing more and more of, and then I'll shut up, is that people just think I need a coach. And they're shying away from what I think the value of bodybuilding is. And I think there's a connection between the way social media is being consumed, the way our brains are sort of being fed unclean information, so to speak, where you don't have to struggle with cognitive difficulties. And it's a cognitive difficulty. Like when you're out doing your cardio, and you've got an opportunity there, and you're recognizing this. Like this is like I have to keep myself focused. I have to figure out a way to encapsulate this pain or give into the pain. I had to figure some sort of cognitive strategy. And your brain was looking for a way out. You're looking to like pull the ripcord and get out of Dodge somehow, right? And so that's what coaches can be for some people. And I think there's an opportunity for development there that. Unfortunately, especially if you're someone who has kind of developed somewhat of a quote unquote addiction to social media or whatever, and you've shied away from difficult things, you may not even be equipped to even start. It's like you haven't done any marathon training. The bodybuilding show prep, let's say, is the marathon, and no time before that, if you even run a 5K, you're not ready for that. So you need someone to put you in the wheelchair now and again, or to put on some, and that's okay. You still get something out of it. It's all relative, but you're missing out potentially on how much stronger, better, more insightful as to who you are, the learning that could come from having to battle through those difficulties. Because life can be really, really easy, and I think life is much more valuable when you have difficulties that you can overcome, challenges, so to speak.
I for sure agree. The thing I actually wanted to do for you, Scott, or for you, with your analogy, is I was thinking, hey, you could actually further it, at least the way because I had a coach this year, and I haven't had one since my first season last year. So I did 2 preps on my own, and now I've had 2 with a coach. So my first and now latest. And just like someone could spot you and they could help you on that last rep, they could also be there and make it like they could push you to push harder, right? So they could maybe only just help you so you get an extra rep that you might not have got, or whatever. They might have just been surveilling you and you get that rep because you're like, oh, I want to perform for this other person. So in the right way, I think, to use a coach for people is if they can push them even harder. I think that's what happened for me, at least this season, where that's almost why I wanted to have someone in my corner, because I was like, am I pulling the plug too soon, or am I pushing myself enough? You get to that point where you're like, should I be pushing harder, or should I like hold and maintain or pull back? And so he definitely pushed me harder than I've done and gone previously. Maybe we learned maybe a bit too hard, or we took it a bit too deep.
That's okay, though.
At one point.
Yeah.
But yeah, you only learn that way.
Right.
But I definitely think the other thing is, and I've even said it, like it's a mental load off to have a coach and just be like, I've said this, I was just giving him my weight and he was giving me my macros. I'm just like, cool, I can just do. But I think there is a problem if you just switch off to the task at hand and you don't think for yourself as well. And I know those previous preps of being self-coached helped me know that, hey, what he was giving me to do, I also have the sense of awareness that it's the right thing or we're on track, and not just kind of put everything on the coach's like lap and just be like, yeah, I'll just do whatever you tell me to do. Because then that's not, you kind of want that dynamic of communication between the two, especially if you're someone who has experience. The more novice you are, I kind of get it. It's a bit training wheels like.
Right. Yeah, it's a collaboration, like with a good training partner, you know?
Yes.
You have a good trainer who like really knows you, who's trained with you for, well, let's say you're maybe a power lifter. So, you know, what loads you pick as you go up in your set, maybe you're X number of weeks out from your competition. And they're there and they help. They say, yeah, I saw, you have this break in your form that happens typically. So watch that, but I think you can get this. And then they're there just to motivate you. And you can do, like, the example that came into my head when you were talking there was like during a squat, where you've got someone who's spotting you, and squat, there can be some anxiety and danger there. I mean, I squat and go to failure because I have safety bars set up. It's just a bizarre thing to me, like as an aside, like I see people squatting and they don't have safety bars. I'm like, why not have them there? Like if you have an injury, then you're screwed with the squat. And you can go to failure, and just knowing you have that there, but having a spotter there for some people, that's so reassuring. So they take the set further. So, and having this collaborative effort with, this is what I think, this is why I do consultations for my coaching rather than just sort of traditional coaching, is we collaborate, and someone comes to me and they, I had this idea and this idea, and they've thought it through. They've gone through all the thinking that they can do. They figured as much as they can. And now they're going to reflect those ideas at me, and I'll reflect back some other thoughts. And I am sort of helping them along in order to become better at what they do in terms of training themselves. And a lot of these guys are also, or women are also coaches too. So, it's the coach then is someone that amplifies your best efforts, rather than, being in an echo chamber where you're like, wow, I wish I could bounce this off with somebody. So yeah, and it's it's hard to know, some people know, as it's like, okay, in this case, I just need to, shift the cognitive load to someone else. Right. And even, sometimes, like, interestingly enough, for some people, and this is a sizable percentage of bodybuilders, I think, there are some bodybuilders who just want to push so hard and too hard. And for them, the difficulty is knowing how to pull themselves back. And this is why they hire coaches, right? And it's like they're just chomping at the bit. And there is this delayed gratification effect, and this I don't want to say, it's this kind of compulsion to overdo things, because that comes actually from a sort of insecurity, I think, in some cases. So it's like, I want to know that I turned over every stone. No stone unturned, right? I did everything, took all my sets to failure, and I just went as crazy as I could. And to be able to step back and say, but look, all your values in the gym are going down, like your strength is plummeting, you are getting leaner, but you're looking really thin. You need a refeed, a deload or whatever. And to be able to take a step back and do that, and be smart with how you're doing. It would be, take the marathon analogy. Someone's like, they're 5 miles away and they're like, okay, I'm going to start my kick. It's like, no, you can't kick for 5 miles. You're going to worsen your performance. So you need to have some self-restraint in terms of how much effort you put forth. And a coach can help you learn that, just because they could be the one to say, hey, you need to slow down. Like, okay. And then because the idea won't occur to you. Sometimes you won't figure that out unless I never really had a coach during any of my, there were 40 shows or so that I did. But I didn't mind learning the hard way. I actually liked that, and I always used all the resources that are around. I talked to people like Dante Trudell and Ken Hill, and all the online resources that you could and John Meadows, of course, we chatted just tons about various things. So anyway, I think again, it's just being aware of like, what am I doing with the coach? Am I taking the intrinsic reward of this effort away? Am I minimizing what I could be had? And I know that this can be had. You just don't have to have a few screws loose like me for this to work. Well, maybe all these people do. That's possible too. But I hear from lots of people who bought my Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book, they bought the book. If they buy it on Amazon, I don't know. I do see if someone buys the PDF. And they come to me like a year later and say, "Hey, Scott, I just want to let you know, I bought your book and I just used your book and I coached myself and I did everything and I won my regional show." And they look friggin' phenomenal. They show me that. I'm like, oh my God, it was just so badass. And they share that with me, which I'm so lucky that they do this with me, because it lets me know that I'm helping people help themselves, right?
Yeah.
And for them, for these people who are on this sort of end of the spectrum, like that's just a tremendous win. And the book is that's the thing, is like the whole world around us, is maybe a crutch, right? I mean, like you can make it harder. Go train in the desert. You don't have any water, right? So if you have a water bottle, that makes everything is available to sort of make things easier. So you can take this analogy too far, right? You don't have. Man is not an island, so to speak. But it can be done, and more and more. And this is kind of my point. I think when we launched into this discussion is that more and more people don't see from the outside that that they may be missing out on the rewards that could be reaped from bodybuilding. And I know in my current life situation, we talked a bit about my dog and just the things that are kind of going on in my life. I know that when I think back and compare, because I'm not dieting right now, I compare, when I was balancing work and dieting and those sorts of things to what I'm doing now, everything's so much easier, relatively speaking. If I hadn't had those experiences as a bodybuilder, I would be weathering the sort of mini storm that I don't even think of it as a mini storm. It's just life. It's just how it is. But I wouldn't have that perspective, I don't think, if I hadn't bodybuilded for so long. I hadn't been doing that. So
yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the classic is yin and yang, you kind of sun without rain type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like for things to be good, you kind of have to experience bad. Otherwise, everything's just average. If everything's good, nothing's good. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to kind of enjoy the moment you're in now, like you said, you had to have gone through tougher times.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I really appreciate from bodybuilding, because it does push me to discomfort on a daily basis, and it makes me do things that my body doesn't want to do, my mind doesn't want to go there. And yeah, like I said, I have never binged on like dirty quote unquote food
Right.
during a prep. I've just never had that. But certainly, yeah, my brain binged during that period of time, and it wasn't super happy. And it also brings me on your kind of coaching methodology. I really see eye to eye on you with that, because something we've held on to at Revive Stronger is video check-ins.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than I said emails previously, but that's not really the coaching format. It's more like they email across a video link to a vlog, so a video diary. So they kind of talk through their week, what went well, what didn't go well. So it's much more dynamic and communicative and more of a collaboration that way. And then I record a video back, kind of talking through everything on my end. It kind of saves these live chats are kind of hard to schedule with lots of people all over the world. So it's a way of kind of getting that one-on-one personal training and true coaching feel without and via email, I feel like you can lose that.
Yeah.
So I found when people can talk through things, it opens up avenues they otherwise wouldn't, or questions or feelings and thoughts. And then similarly on my end, it allows me to ask, like I find myself asking my questions to my clients all the time based off those videos. And I'm sure you're the same on the consults, where you're just like, they reel off a bunch of stuff and you're like, I have 10 questions to ask you now to get deeper into this, to get to the best coaching outcome for you.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple of thoughts. One, I don't know if you're familiar with Dostoevsky, but one of his principles was that suffering is what allows us to see beauty. And it's that contrast. It's very much a yin and yang. You can't know black if you don't know white. You can't know top if you don't know bottom. And if you don't know suffering, you don't know beauty, so to speak. So if life's too easy, then you're not going to be able to see how wonderful life is. so to speak, which seems very paradoxical. And the other thing, I really love how you guys do your check-ins. I know a few people who do them that way too. I actually do live conversations with people, so whenever, face to face, whenever possible. Sometimes the internet doesn't allow that, but and the one thing I do too that I kind of intentionally might get people in whenever I can, whenever they need. If they have some quote unquote emergency, like they got to something's went awry and they got a show or what have you. That of course happens, but I think it's useful to have a delay where say they want to make. For me, it's just I usually do kind of ad lib consultation. So some people say we're going to do one every X number of weeks, or twice a week for 5 weeks or whatever, or that just whenever they need me. But that delay, let's say that's 2 or 3 days before I can get them in or whatever, they've got their questions. Then they have to, instead of getting immediate gratification and that they get their answer, they have to sit and think about it. And I tell people there are so many times when just that delay, we don't need the consult anymore because they figured it out. And I'm like, yes, I don't make any money that way, but that's exactly what I want. Some of it's like, okay, if I ask this question, Scott's going to probably ask me this, and I need to think about this and this and this. And they actually reversed the whole thing in their head. And next thing you know, they didn't need the consultation because they became their own bodybuilding coach, just like the book says, right? They became their own consultation consultant. So yeah, that's huge. And it runs counter there. I mean, there are a lot of coaches I know, and this is a huge selling point is, he responds right away. And I know coaches that are always online, and they're constantly there. And, that I think works against someone becoming an autonomous, independent exerciser who will develop a habit and a perspective on what they're doing when they finish competing. There's lots of things we could go into, the approaches where, this doesn't happen with your folks. I think you're probably working mainly with natural people, but there are lots of coaches that go, hog wild with the PEDs right off the bat. You don't learn how to train. Like it covers up all the learning possibilities. It would be like, getting in the, getting on an e-bike, for the Tour de France, and there's no struggle there, right? So you don't learn things along the way. You don't learn how to pace yourself. You just cruise up the hills because they're not hard. And the drugs can do that. And so that, and then the constant immediate feedback on things where you don't have to sit. It's like this, the classic silly questions is like, hey, is it okay if I have, a scoop of ice cream after dinner tonight? We're going to this really nice place. And it's like, yeah, you could do that. Like, it's up to you, but why do you need my approval? Right? You know what the diet is. And there's a moment of struggle there for people. And I'm not saying it's bad or good to have done that, but just to, there's all sorts of, you could like probably spend an hour doing a psychological analysis of why someone would do that. Like, why are they bowing down to authority? Why do they need an authority figure? Do they have mommy or daddy issues or whatever it might be, right? This is what I'm paying you for, is to do this thinking for me and keep me out of this difficult conversation. So I think when people do that, I mean, that's, you could say, I mean, and again, I'm not trying to cast stones, but that for someone who is committed to going after it to get on stage and try to do their absolute best, that is not the most quote unquote adult way to go about it to a certain degree. It's akin to, this just popped in my head, like the child who knows, like, you get your allowance when you do your chores around the house and you need to make your bed every morning. That's just how we do it. And the child's like, do I need to make my bed this morning? It's like, yes, you do. You need to make your bed. And you tell the kids that repeatedly, and then they realize that they have responsibilities. And when they do the things, they learn sort of how life needs to be as an adult. And that can sometimes happen in coaching relationships. And this doesn't mean like the coaches, I mean, I consider myself a servant for my clients. And just like a good parent shouldn't completely spoil his kid, and kid wants chocolate, you just go buy him a 5-pound bag of chocolates, right? You have a responsibility to try to make your child as independent, autonomous, and able as you possibly can. And so when someone might coach something like that, you say, I will leave that up to you. think about the things we talked about, and that call is yours to make. Just let me know what you did so we can adjust as necessary, right? That sort of thing. So that, I mean, you can address those things. But that's how. So it's not about, like, the way I do coaching, at least. It's not about, it's not about that you don't care about your clients. It's very much the opposite. I try to keep my personal life out. I have very friendly relationships with all my people I do consultations with, but I'm absolutely serving them, and I'm serving them as best I can by trying to foster the development. This is like, kind of like you see in martial arts. You've got a sensei or what have you, and
Yes.
it doesn't help them to be easy on them. That's kind of the purpose, right? So for people who are listening, it's like, what kind of coach do you want? Do you want the coach who says, when you get, it's like, oh, I feel tired. Can I stop? Like, are you having a medical emergency? No, well then just keep going. That's the point of this. Would you want a sensei? Would you want your child to do that? You want it to be hard. That's the purpose. Getting back to the theme we're at, So that's why I do coaching the way I do, and I think it's just something to look out for.
Yeah.
And it's a weird selling point to me. It's like you see this too. I'm not a martial arts person. I know lots of people who are parts of martial arts, and when this topic comes up, they just like roll their eyes. And it's like, imagine if you advertise like, we will make it as easy as possible to get your black belt, right? The easiest, the fastest, quickest black belt in town, right? You're like, what do I want that for, right? And no coach is going to say that, but it's somewhat analogous to that in certain ways. So,
Yeah.
all right, I'll get off my soapbox on that. But
no, I really, really relate to it. And I think early Steve in his coaching career wasn't the best at that. And it was, my thought of serving my clients was, if I'm really quick on response times, if I kind of almost tell them what they want to hear, not what they need to hear, these sort of things, like make them feel happy in every instance. But sometimes you have to make them not feel unhappy, but get them feeling a bit uncomfortable. And I've always because I'm a people pleaser at nature, but I want the best for my clients.
Yeah.
So I'm always very sure, and normally all of them know this, but I am like double down on it. So if I ever am critical of them, I'm just like, I'm telling you this because I want the best from you, not because I'm trying to be an asshole here.
I care.
I'm not being hard on you. Yeah, I care. I legitimately care. And similarly, some people might use what you said there in terms of response times as a bit of an excuse to be a lazy coach and not be a servant to their clients.
Right.
But definitely, I have had clients sign up who want like WhatsApp access to me.
Yeah, well, that's
they're
what
like, I
happens.
can message you at any time for like an answer, and I'm like, I only give WhatsApp access to my competitors when they're like months within stage, because then I need to be a bit more on top of them for, like, if we're assessing their physique, peaking, if there's any flames, I want to put out a fire. If a binge is coming, like, I want to help. But otherwise, like, there's no emergencies within like just general off-season training, nutrition for people. So it shouldn't be that they have to be so panicked that they can't just email. They have to literally be on WhatsApp and message you,
Right. Yeah. There's reasons why. That's the beauty of the technology, that you can communicate like that. I remember like back when Chad Nichols first started working with like Ronnie's talked about this, and they like fax pictures, right? Come through with the fax, and so that's how they had to get it across. You couldn't just email a picture or whatever. So like that was what long distance coaching that was high tech, So now you can do like video posing coaching, right? It's live. It's crazy, insane how things. And when younger people starting off, this is why I think it's important for me as the old crotchety guy to say this, because it will resonate with some people. I've got someone who I've communicated a lot with on Instagram who does fortitude training, and I didn't know him that well, but we shared, I don't know how many, dozens and dozens of voice messages, and I came to find out that years ago he was a wrestler starting at a very young age, and then throughout high school and even college. And I don't know if you know anything about wrestling, but wrestling is brutal, absolutely brutal, and it develops a certain self-reliance and toughness and resilience, like I think as much as just about any sport would, any endeavor would. Really, really tough. And he probably had an inclination for that. It may have been his parents that started him off in that. But so he then has a totally different perspective than a lot of people his age would. So someone who's young, who's first coming into bodybuilding, they're like, well, I need a coach, and I want to get the coach who's the best. And this is the coach that responds right away. That's going to be the best way to steer me in the right direction, because then I won't make any mistakes. It all makes perfect sense, right? And they may have no one around them saying, they maybe don't have a sporting background, so to speak, and they have no one around them to tell them that the harder it is, the better. Like with wrestling, for instance, I wrestled a couple of years, and the hard practices were hard because wrestling is hard. It's absolutely exhausting. If I went and tried to wrestle somebody, first of all, I'd probably dislocate half of my joints, right? If anyone knew anything, they'd just absolutely destroy me. But you see people who are even actually athletes, and they go and they wrestle or do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and after a minute, they're gassed. Bodybuilders, especially big guys, are just totally gassed. So the training had to be really, really hard because the sport was really, really hard. So when it comes to bodybuilding, it's really, really hard if you're in the bodybuilding division or divisions that focus on conditioning. Like the new edition Model Fit in the NPC, you probably heard about. Like that's going to be that's very much more of a beauty competition. That's a whole other topic. But when like just crazy conditioning, it's hard. So you actually. And that's the redeeming value of it. And that idea is that the reason why you want to do this is if you ask someone, I don't know if this thought is a conscious one that occurs to people, but listeners can maybe think, it's like, well, why do I want to do this? What? And like I know with like a lot of bodybuilders, you hear their kind of origin stories, and they saw like He-Man, or the superheroes, where they think that's just badass. And you think, well, why do you think that's badass? It's because that's extraordinary, and they look powerful. And I like the strength that exudes from that. I want to be able to have that. I want to be able to look like and feel like I can do really, really difficult stuff, right? And, a woman, like this popped in my head. There was a woman back a long time ago in Arizona who was a figure competitor. And at this time, they were really focusing on figure being, this was before women's physique existed. Figure had maybe just come into existence at that time, maybe 5 years or so, I'm guessing. I'm not sure. This was in like the early 2000s. And she didn't want, from what I understand, like a big female bodybuilder aesthetic. But she liked being like what some divisions down in South America look like. The women are sort of physique-like, but they also have very elegant, flowing physiques. They're not like, they don't have like, she didn't want the wellness style, like really big lower bodies. She just wanted this like really athletic, like Panther-esque type of physique. And she would do the Arizona shows and just go into the show shredded. And she looked like such a badass. She looked like she looked like an absolute superhero. Someone who could like call all the beasts from the jungle if she wanted to. She always placed last. She'd be like, last place because her conditioning was way outside the standard. But she didn't care. So she was someone that just popped in my head. Like that was her aesthetic she just went for it, and she wanted to do that. So if back to bodybuilding and coaching, if like the thing that draws you to the aesthetic of what you would look like on stage or the process is how difficult it is, and how like if you look at that person, you're like, that person is cast out of iron. Like they've weathered some storms in order to create that. And people, you get that. I'm sure you get that, when you're in the gym, whatever. People are like, how long have you been training? Like, oh my God, the dedication, they think you train 4 hours a day, 7 days a week or whatever. Yeah. Like, if that's what it is, I'm trying to piece together the pieces for people who maybe haven't thought this through. If your attraction to having the physique is that it exudes a sort of power and strength, there's nothing wrong with that, right? You can still be the nicest person in the world and still come across as sort of physically impressive, and maybe to some people even imposing. It may not be your intention, but if you want to look like a badass, then you want to find a coach who's going to make sure you become a badass, right? And the badass is the one who says, okay, I don't care how hungry I am or whatever, I'm going to make the decisions. I'm going to battle on. I'm not going to have the ice cream because I know it's not on the diet. I'm going to continue to kick ass. I'm an ass kicker. That's how it is. And I'm going to look like an ass kicker along the way. So having a coach who is not going to coddle you, so to speak, is maybe fits with the mentality that actually brought you to being a bodybuilder or going into a physique sport. And I think it's just connecting those dots. Like, okay, I want a coach who's going to maybe figure out, like you were saying before, I love this, who's going to figure out how we can make this harder, how I can train harder, I can diet harder, and then have a better end result. Not someone who's going to just amongst his hundreds of clients who's just going to send me generic diets but respond immediately and I'm going to get there. But it wasn't that difficult. And I didn't run a fast race, and my marathon time wasn't nearly what it could have been, and my physique didn't get where it could have gone. That coach hasn't helped you. They may have just taken your money, or they denied you what you were looking for in the first place, is to do badass stuff and to have it show externally like that you've got a badass physique. So hopefully that resonates with, if it resonates with one person, then mission accomplished.
It definitely resonates with me because I've had clients where the clients I struggle with are the ones who don't tend to be wired that way. I find most people that compete are kind of wired that way, where you almost have to save them from themselves,
Right.
where they do
Pull
want to
back.
push too hard, diet too soon, like they don't want to pull back, they don't want to kind of do these things that are ultimately going to make them better in the long run. It's the ones who are trying to look for the easy way out all the time, where they are like, oh, can I have an ice cream here? Oh, like we're this many weeks out, it's okay if I'm slightly over my calories this week, isn't it? And I'm just like, them I have to get on top of immediately. I'm like, if you're failing now and it's only going to get harder, it's going to be real hard. So get on top of it now, almost do the hard work early on so that it's as easy as it can be towards the end, which is always as hard as anything. So there's no kind of easy route to the stage, as it were.
Yeah, I think, the thing that, like, having this sort of metacognition that it's those hard things, the difficult things, the struggles, maybe the quote unquote suffering that eventually makes us better is a hard thing to do. So it's a hard thing to have that in your head and to realize. I mean, it took me years and years. I've learned all sorts of lessons during the various shows that I did. But just like training, I realized that the harder the set was, the better the stimulus to some degree, in the right measure, right? The easy training is not going to get it done. And I realized it's like, okay, I want to be, there's a balance point. I want to be as comfortable as I can in making sure I'm getting into contest condition. But I also know that I'm going to need to be really hungry and really uncomfortable at points. And to recognize that is what behooves you. Like that's really kind of what you're looking for, is a hard thing to have when you're a young person. But I think even younger people people who are, in their teens even, can look back and, like, the stories you tell are about all the crazy stuff that happened, Like, I'll tell a story from, I don't think I've ever told this on a podcast, but there was a Clint Eastwood movie called Heartbreak Ridge. It's a great movie. Gunny Sergeant Tom Highway. I can do a Clint Eastwood impression that I've been doing for years, right? And
is this black and gray videos?
There's some out there, like you can find on YouTube.
Okay.
There's all sorts of clips on. I found the other day and sent it to my friend. So my best friend in high school, we played football, and we went to like a 3-a-days football camp that lasted like 5 or 6 days, right? And by the end, we'd gone through all of our clothes. What we were doing is we get done. This is the middle of the summer in Illinois. It's hot and humid, and we just get in the water, jump in the pool with our shorts and socks on, or whatever, and just take those and hang them up in the room. So we were like on the second or third round of wearing the same clothes that had never been washed, right? Because we're working out so many times a day, and we're lying there. It's like the night before, and I remember this story because it was so crazy. Everything was sore, beaten, bruised, bleeding in various places. We just going to war. And this is a pretty high level football camp, and the really good players there. We're just absolutely exhausted, and lying there, and I said, I'm not gonna. I guess I could say the line. There's a line from this Clint Eastwood movie, and he says, "How about I bend you over and roust you in the keister?" Right? It's this crazy line. Like, why does he say that? So I said that to my buddy Jim, and then he said another Clint Eastwood, and we lied there, and we're just absolutely destroyed, just exhausted, and just laughing our asses off. And that's a memory that I cherish. It's one of my favorite memories from my childhood, from when I was a kid, right? and we were wrecked, like absolutely wrecked. It's about as tired, like, a few more days, we would have suffered, catastrophic injury because everything was so beaten up. They ran us hard. But that was meaningful. That was formative. And I remember that. And I look back on that very, very fondly. But it was very, very painful and very, very difficult, very fatiguing. So I think a lot of people have, memories of that kind, that they can look back on when, they were in some sort of emergency, or, remember when we were in that car wreck, which isn't great, nothing, but, we both woke up and, and I said something funny to you or whatever. There's all sorts of, the hard things in life are the things that are salient and that are important to us. And you don't kind of realize that until you're looking back, and hindsight's 2020. And so that's part of what can be had. Like, we live in a first world country where things are really pretty easy, and you can just completely rely on all the conveniences, the physical. We have electricity and running water and air conditioning, and we don't have, except when catastrophic things happen, we don't have things that are difficult that bring us together like that. In bodybuilding and sports, really, this is kind of the purpose of sports, the way I understand it. I had a wonderful ethics and sport class in graduate school, and the redeeming value there is that you have conditions where you can compete against someone and create difficulty in your life where that person makes you better, and vice versa. You go and you play, basketball, and you're Michael Jordan, you play basketball against a junior high schooler. It's like, he's not going to get anything about that. He wants to play against the best people there are. That's the redeeming value. So you go into a bodybuilding show and you win, right? You beat everybody, right? Or you do it and you're in your gym. Everyone's like, "Oh my God, you look great!" Blah blah blah. And for someone, this isn't to negate like someone who maybe lost 200 pounds in getting there. That's a huge victory. But if you have like an easy prep, you missed out on the difficulty. You missed out on, and when, like, I have stories of, I mean, gosh, you probably have these too. Like they're doing the cardio, and you're like, oh my God, I need an out. Like, and you're just like manically going through TikTok videos or whatever. That's funny now, but you remember that, right? And that's meaningful to you, as bizarre as it is. But these difficult times in our life are the ones that bring us together. There's a book that I would recommend people check out. It's a pretty short book by Sebastian Junger. Not a German guy, he's actually a U.S. guy. He was a wartime photographer. And I think he lives in Harlem right now, intentionally, because of his experiences as a wartime photographer. And he'd go and he'd see these soldiers, and he'd see these guys keep coming back, right? And he's like, what's going on here? Why do these are guys that don't have to do another tour. They do it because they want to. And what would happen is they go through these life-threatening experiences, these really difficult times, and then they get done and they leave the guys whose lives they were trying to save in many cases, and vice versa, who's maybe saved their lives. They go back to normal society, and things are easy and hunky-dory, and people aren't, sometimes this is just, vets sometimes get this, just in general, that's another topic, but there wasn't this sense of community. This wasn't the sense of togetherness and closeness. And they longed for that. The sense of brotherhood that they felt with their fellow soldiers was such a much better way of living, to be with those people, that they would rather go back and have their lives risked and be in a war than go back to a mundane, sort of superficial society. So the whole book goes through, like, literally stuff like, like, I think it was World War II. Don't quote me on this. World War II and like hospitalizations in the U.S. actually went down because everyone was sort of banding. Maybe it was World War I. We're banding. The whole country was sort of coming together, and it's good for our health to have difficulties where we, as a tribe of humans, can band together. This is why a lot of coaches do a nice job. I think this is why CrossFit works, is because there's a tribal vibe there. It's like I'm part of this team, right? But part of it also is that difficulty, and having other people who you can talk with too is important. So if you're dieting down, like this is why with John Meadows, sometimes I feel like our bond was pretty strong, because we would diet down and like, hey, let's try this out, and we try out certain things on ourselves that we could then use on clients. So there's something to say for that difficulty making life worth living. It's everything which is easy. And last thing I'll say, just another example, is you see all these. This is just the way the news projects these things forward, but you see a lot of like children of stars and rich people that seem to be very often poorly socially adjusted. And I have a friend who's a therapist who has kind of confirmed this, is that they grow up really, really wealthy and all of their concerns are taken care of. And they kind of have elite status wherever they go. And life is really, really hunky-dory, but they don't have those difficulties to form their personality and form their ability to see life for how beautiful it is. And it ends up sort of corrupting their brain. They can't, they're really poorly adjusted because of that. So making stuff tough is a better way to do it in many cases. The harder, the better, you might say, within reason.
Yeah, I definitely agree. A phrase that immediately comes to mind is probably really corny, is like pressure builds diamonds, but
No,
there's very
absolutely.
rarely people who have got to great heights in life without major struggles,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that might be in other areas. And it's something about that experience that propels them forward almost.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it is I always know the things that come to mind, at least in this last prep, was like posing was one of the things I least wanted to do on many days, where
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I know I should do my practice because it's going to be important for stage, and like I want to be as polished as possible. And there were some times where I was just like, this, I don't want to do it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I said that in my head, I was like, when I don't want to do it at all, that's when I must do it.
Right?
That's when it means the
Yep.
most. And then you do it and you're just like, well, you're like, thank God. But you're also like, that's so rewarding now.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's like earning your deload. Like if you just deload every 3 weeks
Right.
when you don't really need it, you're
Mm-hmm.
not really very tired. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I think there's also this comparison to people that win the lottery and they kind of spend it all really quickly. They
Yeah.
don't really feel like it doesn't really mean that much to them. Whereas if someone becomes a millionaire based off all this hard work over
Mm-hmm.
decades of kind of working their ass off at their, like, as an entrepreneur, suddenly like they really value money and it means a
Absolutely.
lot to them. So that's what I love about bodybuilding, really, is it's that delayed gratification of like, hey, I can look back at like 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like you said, people in the gym will be like, oh, do you train this much? I think sometimes I tell them like I've been training for 15 years and they're like, oh my gosh, you only look like that for 15 years. It's going to take me
Little
that
do they
long to
know.
look like that. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you don't know, but I look at it and I'm like, I'm so proud I've kept at it and taken my physique to this level.
You have.
So there I see a huge reward.
I've seen the improvements. I mean, with the pictures you post, you've made you've done really, really, you kicked ass.
I appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
100%. Yeah.
Scott, I know we didn't manage to cover the topic that we spoke about beforehand,
Okay,
but
it's all
as
good.
ever, we kind of get on a bit of a tangent, and it's been great talking about this. I think it's for this, like for the day and age right now, like your wisdom, I think that comes in here is really useful because I think it is so easy to pacify with technology, with
Mm-hmm.
kind of a poor like social diet. What's it? You say? Clean eating. It's
Clean
clean
thinking. Yeah. The
thinking. I don't
yeah.
know why I keep struggling with thinking.
Yeah.
My brain is clearly
Yeah.
not been having a clean thinking.
Dirty thinking is something else, but clean thinking, like
Yeah,
clean
yeah.
eating. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's just a valuable concept and thing to think about. I mean, it's making me want to be better with my social media use and
Cool.
those sort of elements
Mm-hmm.
because you do just get caught up in it quite easily.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's similar to you have one cookie and it suddenly turns into the packet and it takes you down a bit of a dark place potentially. It becomes a habit routine. It's the same way with
Mm-hmm.
the clean thinking / the dirty thinking can take you down
Right.
somewhere where you don't want to go. So I think a great episode, and I'll have to bring you back to discuss the
Right.
other topic, which is kind of a timeless piece. I think this will be
Anytime, my
quite
man.
timely. Have you got anything that you've been working on recently? I know you've been really busy doing
Yeah.
lots of different podcasts and projects and things. Is there anything you've got that, obviously you mentioned your book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, which it's a great read. So I definitely would recommend that one for people.
Yeah. I'm still working on, I've got another book that I think I'm going to put together on an actual peptide. I'm not going to say what it is because then kind of people asking about it, but a peptide that I think folks need to know about. It's one that used to be legal for physicians to compound and prescribe and no longer is, but I haven't even started on the book. It's just like something that I'm itching to get to when I get the time. So, but that'll be a long time before it comes out. But that's it'll be something. It'll be a book. It won't be just quick and dirty. It'll be something that hopefully could clinicians could actually refer to, at least the way I've envisioned it now. But and then I'm always adding stuff, like even in preparation for what we didn't talk about today. I think I added 3 or 4 references to what will be my literature review for the next version of my fortitude training book. So
so you're working on
I'm constantly working on that. Yeah. Some people buy it just
do you
to
have
read the
a
literature.
timeline?
No, it's just taking forever. It keeps growing. It keeps growing.
There's been so much that's come out over the last. I know, for example, Eric Helms he's doing another edition of the Muscle and Strength Pyramids because there's so much that's come out recently. Like over recently being the last like 5 years, there's just been so much.
It's true. It's it's interesting with the fortitude training. I know we need to go, but the way you're totally right. The science has just kind of expanded. There's so many more people doing resistance exercise and bodybuilding related science compared to 20 years ago. It's mind-boggling. It's really, really pretty cool. But what I came up with fortitude training was, it's almost been a decade now since I wrote it, but the program still holds up. It still matches. There's not anything where I'm like, wow, that doesn't work. So that's part of why I'm like, okay, I'm going to update the literature review. But how much am I going to change the program? There's no, like, one of the things is like, what are the factors that are involved with stimulating hypertrophy? And this is kind of semantic: metabolic stress and muscle damage and tension. Like, that idea has been confronted. So I want to do a big section on that. And that's really, from my opinion, that all the evidence that Brad put together initially to substantiate the notion that, for instance, metabolic stress is involved with muscle hypertrophy. Is it does metabolic stress in and of itself cause muscle hypertrophy? Well, it's semantic. Is it involved with muscle? Can you extract metabolic stress from a muscle contraction? No. So it's there. Do harder sets or do heavier loads produce more muscle tension? And do you have thereby more metabolic stress? Yes. So the connection is there. So that's going to be a fun one. That's one thing I want to do, is add up and just sort of correct that, because I got the current state as of 10 years ago in the literature review, but I'm looking forward to sort of revamping or recontextualizing those ideas. So I'm doing as much for that as for the program. I've got some new ideas for programming too, though.
I think it's really refreshing, actually, and you're completely right. When I think about the fortitude programming, it completely holds up today. I mean, it was producing results then; it's going to produce great results now. But it's also not missing things. Like, you had your volume tiers, all of this sort of thing going on, and I think that says a lot. Like, it makes me think of, it's a book that I've been reading called Same as Ever, which basically says, like, the big principles are unlikely to change. It's just like tiny things over time.
Right.
So history is often very telling. So I think that just speaks to that. And even though people get very kind of interested in what's in vogue, like, never forget kind of the basics there. But that chapter sounds very interesting, and with all the references, sounds great. Otherwise, if people want to keep up to date with you, Fortitude over on Instagram, is that the main place?
Fortitude_training. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'll have that linked in the description. And as always, Scott, thank you so much for your time. And guys, thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for having me, brother. Appreciate it.